So I'm Sue Helper, a colleague of Youngjin's from Weatherhead and Case Western Reserve, and it's my pleasure to introduce the panel on talent acquisition. And so there's three of us, including me, and I'm going to introduce all three of us, and then we'll just go in order. So the first speaker is Jean Sasso, who's the Director of Career Development at the Siegel Center for Lifelong Learning at Case Western Reserve. And he'll talk kind of about the supply side of the labor market and the digital talent issues, and how do you create a supply of people with the skills that are needed. I'm an economist, so I supply, and then we have the demand side, ably represented by Cheryl Hay, who's the Director of Project Talent Acquisition at Jobs Ohio. And then I finally will attempt to pull things together and talk about the interaction of supply and demand, talking about some survey and interview research I've done on manufacturing and servitization adoption of digital innovations. And so I think we're each going to speak for 6 to 9 minutes, so that will leave plenty of time for questions. So the dynamic nature of the panel will be in large part determined by the questions, so get them ready, and we'll go from there. So Jean?
Thank you, Sue. I don't know how I got onto this panel. This is a great honor for me to be here in front of all you wonderful people. This is quite our introduction this morning. Really queued things up, and so InDemand, thank you very much. We've got a different way to think about talent and a different way to think about our position as employers, as educators, and so I'm very happy to be here today. I want to talk a little bit. I love my job, and I'm very happy to be here at Case Western Reserve University. We are, I use the phrase, we are lousy with talent. We have lousy with content. We have so much. And I just want to take a little bit of a pause before I get into my talk. Just 2 weeks ago, I was very pleased to be part of this other conference, the Future of Work. And a couple of my colleagues were heading this up and brought in these ideas about the future of work. Well, this NSF initiative, which I thought many of you might be interested in. This notion that the workplace is changing around us, the human technology frontier. This was just happening just a couple of weeks ago here. I encourage you to take a look at this offline to see if your companies might be interested in participating or getting a better sense of this aspect of digital talent. And so this is tens of millions of dollars that the NSF is investing in this topic. There's a center here in Cleveland, Northeast Ohio, helping work through this interface between industry and the academics. The 4 research themes that they're focusing on, if you dig in a little bit more, building the human technology partnership. This is something that I believe probably all of your companies are dealing with right now. Augmenting human performance. This is another aspect of how things will work in a digital future, certainly, and I think Youngjin spoke to some of that sort of indirectly, and illuminating the social technological landscape. The one that's most important to me right now, and that I was just really thrilled to see in the context of this conference, was the fostering of lifelong learning. That's my job here at Case Western Reserve University, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be part of this rethinking of what the ideas of lifelong learning might mean in a university in a context of a Research One university in Ohio. When people think about lifelong learning, they often think about the personal enrichment side of things. You're going to go you retire and you're going to do a painting class, or you're going to do a poetry workshop. We do those things, and we do them very well. We've got a really strong side and a great representation, leveraging great cultural resources around Cleveland. On the other side of the house is what I do, which is continuing education for professionals. We connect. My job is to connect the people, the process, the content, the technology of Case Western Reserve University with companies to fill and identify skill gaps and fill those skill gaps with the content, with the technology, with the people, with the process of Case Western Reserve University to enhance what you do, to upskill your employees. I'm not a big fan of that word, upskill, but there it is. To make sure that your employees are ready for the demands of your customer needs. So we do this, we impact Northeast Ohio. We know, we work with some of the largest companies in the world that happen to be here in Northeast Ohio. And that extends us nationally, that extends us internationally. We do this through our corporate partnerships with companies like your own, with our faculty, administration, and so forth. This is a big part of what we see as the continuous learning economy. Where our goal is to help companies flourish. We know that skills training, you can graduate from this university and other great universities, and you can go on. 2 years, 3 years later, you know that those skills need to be enhanced. You know that computer science major, she's out there, she's doing her stuff, but the programming languages around her are changing rapidly. So we're here. We're looking at not just a 4-year degree. We're looking at a 40-year relationship with students. This is a big shift, and I'm sorry, everybody knows my name. They don't need to do this. There's a big shift that we're recognizing and we're understanding. There's somebody in the United States today who will live to be 150 years old. That's a reality. And we're looking at that reality and we're understanding how that person, those people need to change their perspective. We need to change our perspectives as institutions to work towards a future of a 100-year life. So this is part of my job is to help Case Western Reserve University make that shift towards a 100-year life. The need for agility and innovation. You heard Youngjin speak at length about this. There's a book that I highly recommend if you don't know, Yuval Harari's 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, and he talks about the individual's needs for relevancy. When we're looking towards a future with AI and DL and lots of software and lots of algorithms around us, Yuval's idea, Harari's idea is that this is one of the biggest threats to our future, to the future of mankind. In fact, that in the 20th century, in the 19th century, 20th century, there was a struggle for people were worried about being exploited. Well, now, as we're seeing in a digital economy, people are worried about being relevant, and that's a big idea. That's a big concept that I put forward. That my colleagues, I know Sue and Cheryl and others, thinking of a digital future means that you've got to think about that kind of change in society, and we're certainly thinking in those terms. We also have a big role to play in economic development. Case Western Reserve University in Northeast Ohio has a role to play in a wider context of economic development, and I take that part of my job very seriously. We do corporate training. We, as I say, we work with some of the largest companies in Northeast Ohio and actually nationally and internationally. And these are some of the topics that we help companies come to terms with. This is not a list that I think should be surprising to anybody. If you know anything about Case Western Reserve University, we have expertise in these areas, and certainly we have vertical as well as horizontal expertise. Our expertise in healthcare is formidable, and we're looking at ways that we will provide services to local, regional, and national, and international hospital systems and healthcare systems and insurance companies. And we do custom training as well. We can go into a company and we can talk to your colleagues, to you and your colleagues, and understand what are the pieces and parts that are actually your pain points. What are the things that you recognize for your customers' needs that your employees need help on, and we can help identify and fill those needs. This is another part of my job that's very exciting. This is the part I'm going to concentrate on, and I hope we can talk a little bit more about in the context of the panel. This is the B2C side, sort of in Sue's terms of economics and marketing. This is the B2C side. We do boot camps, and we produce boot camps that help individuals either enhance their current career as IT professionals, or transition into an IT career. These are non-traditional students. These are people who are they come to us because we have a part-time program. It's 24 weeks. It's a couple of nights a week and part of their Saturdays. They can retrain in 24 weeks. They can change. This sounds like hyperbole. They can change their lives in 24 weeks of these kinds of this kind of study, and we see it, and we've seen it dozens, hundreds of times now. Where we will graduate. Probably our 600th graduate will graduate in November. They're phenomenal successes. These are people who are 33 years old as an average. We've had teenagers, and we've had 70-year-olds. We cut across the spectrum, and we recognize the need for this, and we're fulfilling that need. I'm very, very, very proud of the work that we're doing here. So we do full stack coding, we do data analytics, and we do cybersecurity, and we're branching out. There'll be more topics that we provide, and we are amplifying, and we're accelerating our reach and our bandwidth. So 600 graduates after this month, and certainly looking for the growth in the program in topics. This is just quick demographics on what we've been doing with the boot camps. 10 enrollment periods since 2017. As I said, the 600. I'm really keen on increasing the underrepresentation in these areas. These are numbers that they're here, they exist, they're real. I'm working very, very hard to find ways to increase the female participation, increase the underrepresented participation in these programs, and we're looking for partnerships with industry, with foundations and others to maybe augment the price of these programs to make this a more pervasive and accessible program for more people. So these are the people. We do these graduations every quarter, and this is a nice representation. Actually, I'm seeing there's an overrepresentation of our female graduates here. But the fact is that this is the range. We've had doctors. One story of a doctor who emigrated to the United States with his wife in a new position. He was going to go through his recertification. He decided he's going to change his career. He started a coding boot camp. He's looking at an entrepreneurship track now. We've again everything from PhDs to warehouse workers. And this is one of the latter. This gentleman had been he lost his job. He got into a new job, and he decided he was going to do coding, and he went from a warehouse position into a coding position. I think he nearly doubled his salary, probably. Certainly built security, built another life for he and his family, wealth creation, and this happens dozens and dozens of times. The next example is this woman who had worked in a service role, just really nuts and bolts, literally nuts and bolts service role. She transitioned into a marketing position, and then she realized what she needed was data analytics, and she grew through the data analytics boot camp. This happens every quarter, and we're really proud of what we're doing. We know that what we're doing is fulfilling roles, for individuals, also for companies like your own. These are talented people who are ready to go into a workplace role in any company, and we also know that we're doing something really important from an economic development standpoint as well. I'm very, very pleased to be doing my work, and I'm very happy to do both, the B2B side and talk to companies like yourselves, and do the B2C side that provides a service to these people, and make sure that CASE has a relevant role in a future of a digital economy and digital talent. So that's it. Thank you very much.
And Cheryl will have more to say about the economic development side.
So thank you for having me. Can you hear me all right? I'm short, so I never know positioning about this. So I'm Cheryl Hay. I'm with Jobs Ohio, and the framework for my talk is going to be about what Jobs Ohio, what our role is in the talent conversation, to talk about how we're looking at trying to determine what demand looks like at an occupation and skill level, and then to talk a little bit about the different dynamics that employers are finding with today's job seekers as it relates to the employment scenarios that they want to have available to them. So if we, just to talk about Jobs Ohio for a second, so Jobs Ohio is a private nonprofit that focuses on economic development. So we're looking at number of jobs that are added to the Ohio economy, as well as capital investment that follows those jobs. In doing that work, we do that with a number of network partners all across Ohio. We have broken Ohio into 6 regions. So for this region, it would be Team NEO. In the Dayton region, it would be the Dayton Development Coalition, and so on. And then each of them have a network of partners in their region that they utilize to help businesses. The kind of supports and things that we do for them are everything from providing them loans, to looking at equipment grants, to helping them with site selection and reclamation of sites, how we look at helping them with infrastructure and transportation issues. But then in 2017, we started talking with them about talent issues. And that was because of 2 factors. One, competitors in other states were providing a lot of services to businesses around helping them execute job growth strategies and connect with talent as part of that strategy. And then also we were having businesses tell us, I know I could go into new markets. I know automation could move me forward. I know digital transformation could move me forward. I could make more money. But I am worried about adding those jobs because I'm having trouble with backfill. I can't keep up my current production levels. I can't keep up my current service levels because I can't find the talent fast enough, and the talent doesn't always have what I need it to have. And so because of those factors, Jobs Ohio decided to offer talent as one of the services that we utilize to help our employers who are executing growth projects with us. So to step back from that, and then so that kind of gives you an idea of how we're talking with employers and the intel we're getting, let's talk a little bit about what our current workforce scenario looks like. So we are seeing an 80-year low in population numbers. We are seeing the lowest unemployment rate we've ever seen. In Ohio, we have 11.6 million people, with 5.8 of those in our labor force. If we look at degree attainment, we've got 44% of our adults that have some sort of post-secondary credential, but we need 65% just based on projections of right now. So that means 965,000 more people in Ohio have to get some kind of credential or certificate. We've got a little under 1 million people without a GED or high school diploma. So those individuals go back and seek that credential when they're around age 26 in Ohio. And that's usually because they need to get into the next level of employment. And that's being required by their employer. We have about 325,000 people in Ohio who are working multiple jobs. Now, my economists, so Sue will appreciate this, tell me I can't infer that that means that they're working multiple jobs because they need more money, but I'm going to hazard a guess that that's why they're working multiple jobs. But it could also be care-related issues. It could be the flexibility that maybe some of those time allocations allow for them related to shift work. And then we've got about over 265,000 people just in Northeast Ohio alone that need additional credentials. So when you look at all of those things, then you have to look at, okay, if this is our playing field, What do we do to take people in all these different types of life scenarios and actually bring them upskilled, to use your word, Jean? How do we upskill them? And what do we upskill them to? So what's the demand side? What do businesses want? How are they projecting those needs? And what do those skill sets look like in those projected job classifications? So in Ohio, we've developed what we call an in-demand list. So the Department of Job and Family Services has been tasked with looking at what's coming out of our schools and what are employers saying their demand looks like, and how are those two correlating? Are we up? Are we down in production? And what does that look like? Now, to get at demand numbers, if you're just doing a number calculation, how we do it in Ohio is we look at how many jobs are posted out there in Ohio by businesses, how many individuals are in the projections for business labor, for our BLS data, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and then we also do a business survey. So we send that out to employers and we say, please respond to this. It's just a couple questions, but let us know what you need so we can get something that's a little more real time. But the problem with that is many businesses don't respond to it. We don't have enough businesses paying attention to it. So when you get that data back, it could skew your numbers a little bit. So let's say a lot of small to medium finance organizations responded to that survey. We might come up with tellers as an in-demand job. Now, I don't know about you, but the last time I interacted with a human being on a financial transaction in a bank, I can't even remember when that was. So that would indicate that that was not the right set of numbers and right set of jobs to look at. So the only way we know how to do it is painstaking. It's bringing employers in a room together, gathering them by industry in what we call industry sector strategies. This is a process that the Aspen Institute has actually worked with communities on how to gather businesses together, have them look at labor market data as a starting point, and then ask them some really relevant questions about what are you going to need and how soon are you going to need it, especially when it comes to automation. How quickly are you going to be automating? You know, many of our businesses tell us they already have costed the price of automation, but they haven't pulled the trigger for two reasons. One is cost. So right now we don't have the money, but when they get ready to pull the trigger, it's usually because they can't find talent. So they're trying to figure out how to automate those pieces of their business that are actually beginning to hurt them because they can't find people. And then the other side of that is automation is keeping them competitive. So how fast are their competitors getting to that space, and how fast do they have to get to that space? So when we bring employers together and ask them questions about specific skill sets, that's when we really get our richest information. What do you need people to look like? How soon do they need to look that way? And I wish I could say Ohio has this down for the digital space, but we don't. We've just actually started a strategy at Jobs Ohio to pull people together in the information technology and digital spaces. So over the next month, we're going to bring employers together by region and talk with them about the skill sets and the domains and what that looks like. But I did find what I thought was a pretty interesting manpower report by the group that does actual talent acquisition and staffing. So Manpower says in a survey that they did that when they look at employer needs, they say that soft skills plus technical plus digital skills are going to be the best blend. So that's what our education structure then has to move to. And when they look at the classifications, they looked across finance, healthcare, and manufacturing, and they said technicians and analysts, designers, producers, and developers, engineers, strategists, architects, integration specialists, modern leaders. Okay, I don't know a SOC code in the Department of Labor that tracks modern leaders, but they define that as future ventures directors. They define that as factory automation engineer managers. So our whole premise of how we look at even calculating data, looking at demand is going to change because it's going to be new titles, new skill sets, and they're going to keep changing so rapidly, it's going to be hard to keep up. So we have all of those things going on in Ohio trying to figure out the numbers of it, but then we also are looking at all those statistics I gave you earlier about people with credentials. So what are we doing about trying to level that market? So Ohio has implemented a number of things. College Credit Plus, where they're actually putting more credit-bearing programs in K through 12. They're looking at how do they take people and give them what they call an adult diploma, where if they did not get their GED, they can actually take some high school courses as well as classes that teach them a technical skill at the same time. They've been looking at Tech Cred, which is a new program that the Governor's Office of Workforce Innovation just rolled out, where businesses can actually apply for dollars to get skill upgrades for their employees, but there has to be a promotional component attached to that. So you can't just upskill people, you have to actually move them up that career ladder. They're looking at badges and certificates and things like boot camps. I mean, we're trying all of these out-of-the-box things to try to get at the skill issue. So there's a lot of things about how to educate and train people, but then you have the whole dynamic about what does the job seeker want. So I'm going to be that speaker everybody hates and ask you to participate for a minute. So would you stand up? Come on, you've been sitting. Okay, now I want you to think a minute about jobs that you've had. Anytime you got pay for conducting a service, counted as a job. So if you did, I mowed the grass, I babysat, I did my church's bookkeeping, and then your formal career. So start counting that up for me. How many jobs, when you count from that premise, have you had to date? Okay, so if it's been 2, take a seat. 4, 6, 7, so 8, 10, 11, 12. How many jobs?
I referee soccer, so it's like all individual.
Okay.
So a lot if we count it all individually. But even if not, then I do consulting. And if you count that all individually, that's
Okay.
a lot of jobs.
A lot of jobs. Okay. So when you think about those jobs, how did you find them? So just yell out, how did you find those jobs? Networking. Formal application. Internships. Recruiters. Luck. It's the right place at the right time when someone needed something. So think about all those ways you find jobs. Job boards, internships, co-ops, all of these things. How am I as an employer supposed to find you? How do I connect with you? Do you all listen to the same radio station? Are you all on the same social media platform that I can find you? So the other dynamic when employers say they can't find people with skills is they can't connect with them. They can't identify where they are. So part of what we've been doing at Jobs Ohio is working with a group that has an AI system that actually tracks social media to figure out, are welders and CNC operators finding jobs via the internet? Or is it still grassroots word of mouth? How are software developers finding jobs, and what media platforms are they using, so that I, as an employer, when I have a job for them, I know where to advertise that job? So some of the data we found is, hey, yeah, you know what? Welders and CNC operators are on the internet, but they're only on Instagram. You know why? Because welders take pictures of what they've built and they put it on social media. So if I'm an employer and I'm spending money on Facebook ads and LinkedIn ads and Indeed ads, I'm not finding welders as much as I would if I did something on Instagram and showed them something about my job. So there's a whole complexity and a data mining that needs to go on for employers to even figure out, where are you and where are you looking when you look for jobs, and how do I make you look at my job over somebody else's? We've had employers who will get absolutely very little return on investment for the jobs that they post, and it's because their job ad is boring. It's a 5-page job description. What's the last thing you read on the internet that was 5 pages long? How long do you read when you're on the internet? Seconds, 30 seconds, maybe a minute. So we have to begin to help our businesses learn that what they're doing is marketing a product. They have to begin to absorb strategies around how you market in order to actually advertise their jobs to people. And then they also have to realize that you want something different than what people wanted in the past. And that's really a struggle for our employers. They want different employment scenarios. I want to know how much autonomy am I going to have in this workspace? How much creativity am I going to have? What kind of employment scenario can I have? Can I work from home so many days a week? Can I work from home always? What kind of environment can I collaborate with people? Do I have a very idea-sharing environment that you're providing for me? And these are all things employers aren't used to. I just worked with an employer who created a whole building that's just for IT people. These people wear jeans, they bring their pets to work, they have nothing but couches, and they carry their laptops around and do their design and development. But that's difficult for employers. That's a whole new scenario, and they have to create new policies and new strategies about how to interface with talent once they even hire them. And so these are some of the dynamics at play when we hear our employers talk about, I can't find people with the right skill sets. These are not little things, they're big things, because right now it's a job seeker market. You can go anywhere and do anything, and people move. They don't wait on promotions, they don't wait on opportunities, and they're really looking to understand the kind of work content, especially in this digital space. That is a huge thing for employers to begin to advertise. What would you be able to work on if you joined my firm? And how much autonomy would you have in that work, or even recognition and ability to work on other things? I work with businesses who give their employees 1 day a month to just work on their own ideas. It doesn't have to be connected at all to the actual business and what it produces, but it's something that those businesses want to promote, because they know that in order to do that, they have to keep the creative piece of people flowing, and they have to provide environments and opportunities for that. So these are just all of the moving pieces when you think about a workforce and talent strategy that you have to look at when you're beginning to plan demand issues, and how do our great education institutions actually meet all those issues and get detail enough on them to design curriculum and programs that are going to meet all these varying needs in the future. So thank you.
So I want to talk about kind of how do you pull this supply and demand together, and I want to look in a particular context, which happens to be the auto supply industry. But I think there's lessons that are useful not just in automotive, but also in other manufacturing and then services as well, in terms of the role of frontline employees, in terms of the role of, do you have functional silos? How can you use digitization to overcome those? Or, failure is in fact always an option, and maybe you're not going to do that. So I think we've heard from Youngjin and others about, there's these incredible opportunities now around Industry 4.0 and bringing sensors and intelligence potentially to equipment and to other forms of operations and services. So I did a study with some colleagues at New York University. I'm also a visiting scholar at MIT working on their Work of the Future program. So this is all inspired in that dialogue, as well as at Case Western. So we wanted to ask what drives adoption of robots and other new technologies. We chose the auto industry because 40% of robots today are in the auto industry. So it's a kind of leading sector. And then kind of how do we think about management and labor management and silos together, and how does it affect how technology is used? So we did a whole bunch of site visits, visited a lot of firms. This is an industry I've worked in for a few decades, so it's interesting to see these companies think about their first robot. And so the firms in the survey that we're going to see are a mix of some pretty small firms that might be suppliers to companies that are in this room. They might be actually these plants of large first-tier suppliers, so Denso, Johnson Controls, et cetera. There's quite a wide variation. And one of the things that's quite interesting is that the robots and various forms of automation are becoming cheap enough that even pretty small companies can experiment. And then we also did a survey. And so we got a couple of automakers to give us their supplier list. So we got some pretty good response rates from those companies. So what we're seeing in this auto supply industry, maybe I should tell you a little bit about the survey. So we have actually a little bit more than that, about 180 responses. And from these two automakers, in terms of their first-tier suppliers, we had about a 50% response rate. So we feel like it's a fairly representative sample. And then we have some smaller companies as well. And these are companies typically, or plants that are about 150 employees. And so you see that there's a lot of adoption of physical equipment. So almost 80% have at least one robot. You see even some cobots, collaborative robots, small friendly robots that firms have. Over half of the, on average in a factory, over half of the parts are tracked in some kind of automated way. And then AGVs, automated guided vehicles, a little bit less. One of the things that I think is very important, and I think is a perspective that we share at Case Western and isn't always shared, I think, so much in the world, which is that technology doesn't just fall from the sky. That the way that technology is developed and used interacts a lot with management strategy. And so we identified two kind of poles of management strategy. And then later at the end, I'll talk a little bit about hybrids. But one kind of comes from an old, the Taylorist idea that labor, or there's a separation between brain work and hand work. And you have your IT person or your top manager, your engineer, you want them to be thinking. You do not want them on the shop floor. So I'm actually thinking that this idea of building your separate IT building is kind of an example of that. You're going to separate your brain work and your hand work, and you're going to specialize. And the advantage of that is then you don't have to pay the handwork people very much. And you also can implement your ideas, the engineer's ideas, directly. You don't have to go through pesky people who won't always follow directions. There's another view, which is a pragmatist view. And a lot of this, I think, is you can see this at Toyota, to some extent, at some of the Detroit 3 auto plants. So Ford has a large engine plant here. And Ford and the UAW, actually I'll get to that in a sec, have really worked closely. And here the key idea is that the person closest to production has expertise that no one else has. So I'm talking about this in a factory context. They're looking day after day at this piece of equipment. And so this strategy suggests, well, maybe a little bit of training can help them see patterns in the problems they observe, and then you need some kind of mechanism to help them communicate what they see. And so from this point of view, you can imagine that the machine can actually be a complement to the worker. So the worker doesn't have to do the drudgery of the actual operation. They also are not, plotting data on a chart, because that automatically happens. The machine does that and will spit out a graph. So you can move immediately to the worker using their intuition, in collaboration with an engineer to figure out what happened. And so this is a manufacturing context, but you could also imagine frontline employees that are serving customers and, understanding quirks of customers, et cetera. And so I think, these have very different talent implications, which I'll come back to in a sec. So just to kind of give an example here, this is a supplier. It's a small Cleveland company, about 15 minutes drive from here. And so this is an example, actually, of a very cheap machine vision system. They brought in an integrator to help them with the first one. The first and the engineer, then a Case Western graduate actually, figured out, well, gee, for less than $1,000 per line, he could figure out how to do cameras. He can figure out how to do inspection. And so this, led to, in general, a much better, more automated, more consistent inspection practice. The problem was that some of the time there was sort of nobody was really monitoring this. and nobody was really trained except him to understand what these cameras were doing. So one day I went to the company, and there's this worker sorting parts. Somebody knocked the camera, and everything was listed as correct, and they knew that wasn't likely, so they had to go through and hand sort. So it's an example of kind of just trusting the equipment, assuming it's working without maybe kind of an interaction. But this actually, I think, kind of shows the kind of potential for, this is a very old equipment. This is a hand press, manually operated press, but then down here you can actually see the cameras. So I think in some ways it's a cool example of kind of upskilling, but then some issues maybe. Then the other example is actually the Ford Cleveland engine plant. Or actually, that's not what it is. This is an automated assembly cell for an ignition switch. And overall, when they did this automated assembly cell, they got increased precision in placing the parts. But sometimes the defect caught in station 4 was actually caused in station 3. And so this is an example where somebody outside looking at the data is going to say, well, we really got a problem in station 4. And because this particular plant had workers trained in problem solving, they would immediately say, no, that's not where the problem is. The problem's actually caused. You need to go back a station. I don't know, do people know the technique, the 5 whys? Is that something people have heard of? So it's a Toyota technique that you ask, well, why is there a defect at station 4? It's because at station 3, there's a robot that gets tangled around the cylinder. Well, why is there a problem there? And then you can keep going 5 times at least. So one of the things we did then was to try to examine, well, what do we see? What of these 2 different kinds of adoption, what kinds of patterns do we actually see in the data? And so we looked at 2 things. One is, are they pragmatic? And this is essentially a bunch of different measures of how much latitude do production workers have, how much training do they have to take advantage of their proximity to the shop floor. And then the second one was what we call data-driven decision making. Do they actually try to predict downtime, et cetera? And so one of the things that's very interesting is the wage implications of this. This is a little bit process, but the idea here, the key takeaway, is that when workers have these additional responsibilities on the shop floor, their wages go up. So if a company just adopts robots, it's correlated with lower wages. And so, but if they put in robots and the Pragmatist procedures, then they actually have higher wages. And one of the things they get is no additional cost. So they basically have workers working smarter, not harder, and they also get higher quality than compared to than people without the pragmatic. So what does this all mean? Want to try not to take away too much of our question time. I think the key here is that firms really pursue these 2 different management paradigms, and there's different training implications. So I think if you're going to do the pragmatist idea, then you're going to want to think about your frontline workers not just as people who are going away, but as people whose skills you can actually tap into and make your automation process work a lot better. And a second kind of thing is you can also use this for management folks, white-collar folks. If you think about silos, you can easily track, at least in principle, maybe when purchasing used the cheap part, purchasing saved money, they look good on their metrics, but actually operations had a lot of downtime that was costing way more than the piddly little savings that purchasing got. So how do you fix this? So I guess as an economist, it's I think incumbent upon me to say, it's not just about training and the supply side. You got to think about the demand side and integrating this. So you got to change some incentives. If you want the frontline workers to be involved in this stuff, you may need to pay a little bit more. You get what you pay for. You may need to be training either in-house or take advantage of some of the great offerings we've heard about. And then you also need to change the way your supervisors work, that, somebody pointing out a problem, that's actually a great thing. Every defect is a treasure. Is not a problem, an unruly employee. And thinking similarly about, purchasing people. Make sure that everybody knows how to use whatever version of software you've got that allows them to see the data from other functions. So these are things that I think sometimes that we put things too much on this individual worker that is unskilled, and then really the problem is maybe we're not paying enough, maybe we haven't set up the right incentive structure within our companies. So with that, I think that's, I guess, what I had, and maybe we could all come up and take some questions, and we have, about a little more than half an hour. So, I guess if you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are, and then we'll get a dialogue going. Yeah, please.
So I'm Bailey Miller. I am a recent move to Cleveland, and it's been interesting. I came to this conference basically both to learn about realities of digital transformation and also basically to find a job here. I'm working remotely for a company back in Michigan still. I'd like to find something local. So there's been all this talk about this hybrid employee, right? This multidisciplinary employee and positions for that sort of person. And I can tell you from personal experience, it's difficult to slot myself into, especially large corporations, because if you look at job offerings, they're either in the silo of supply chain management, for example, or operations, or they're in the silo of IT. And the supply chain or operations people are doing the day-to-day things and deciding what's necessary from a business perspective. And there's some sort of wall, sometimes a physical wall, I think like mentioned. And then the IT people then do something to solve the problem. And I think my personal value coming from enterprise software consulting and then education in supply chain management and industrial engineering, I am in that middle. Oh, sorry.
We pass it around for the recording, everybody? It's on.
I'm not going to say all of that again.
No, I think,
Okay.
Well, I think that's actually a great thing. I don't know I'm sorry, I'm using my mic now. So why do you guys want to say some things about that? And we can also have, if companies in the room have either made some progress or encountered some obstacles in creating slots for this hybrid employee. But, Pete?
We see some interesting trends and focus. I don't know if I'm going to address it directly, but we'll get back to it. I mean, for us, there's an interesting dynamic going on with non-traditional students. People bringing some of the soft skills that we're talking about over years and years in their positions into technical roles. That's certainly one thing. And we also have encountered some difficulties. Again, I don't think I'm addressing your question directly here, but we've encountered some difficulties with companies. You have a degree, I'm guessing. Are you undergrad, graduate level, or? So
I have 2 master's degrees.
Okay.
Industrial and operations engineering, the other in supply chain.
Welcome to Cleveland. I mean, you're in the right place. It's a but we find sort of a counter trend around this with the way the labor market is going right now. That companies are very traditionally looking at they need those degrees. They need those degrees. They need people with those degrees, but they're not. They still have roles to fill, and they have skills that they need to bring in, and so we're having some difficulty with some employers. They've got a gap. We've got people with skills, but they're looking for a degree on top of that. Again, I am not addressing your question. I'm sorry.
Cheryl, do you want to jump in?
I think part of what the dynamic is for job seekers is because our titling system is like I talked about. We have 800 titles in Department of Labor, and none of it is caught up to what's going on today. So it's really now incumbent on the job seeker, and I think today you're doing the absolute right thing. So coming to events like this and networking with people who are actually doing the jobs, who are supervising those roles and can see how to transfer and transition your skills. Because typically the individual in human resources who is posting a job cannot be an expert in every job that's posted for their organization. I can't always look at you and understand how to integrate and even morph your skill set into something that could even benefit us more. Usually the person that's supervising the work you're doing has a better understanding of that they would hire you with certain skill sets and morph you into something that they know they need, but they haven't even sat down with me to develop the job description yet for it. So unfortunately, it makes your job harder because you got to apply for jobs on both sides. Because it's the only way to get in front of the people that can have the conversations with you about, you know what, as I look at your skill set and I think about our problems and where we need to go, I could actually accelerate if I moved you into this type of role. But it takes that conversation. It even takes those departments talking, because typically there's silos between them, right, and certain walls. And so it's even those people having, so it's getting inside and then trying to help move it in a direction that helps that company that hasn't even thought about yet. And I know that's not ideal, but that's kind of the space that we're in right now. It's really incumbent on the job seeker to tell your story, to really make me see how you can be utilized. You can't wait on my questions, because typically I'm never going to ask you the right questions. You have to figure out how to make me understand your value without my even going there.
Open it up, and I don't know if there's people in the room that have struggled with this issue and maybe have either some additional dilemmas, and what is it, maybe it's not as easy as it sounds. I'm sure it's not, or you've had some success with creating these hybrid positions or hiring hybrid people. Anybody want to jump in? Yeah.
One of the things I saw.
Can you say who you are?
My name's Jason Zeman, and I'm a leader in our consulting practice at Cohen & Company. Just recently left Deloitte's digital controllership practice to join Cohen. Previously, I was at Progressive, and one of the things that they embrace is codeathons or hackathons to potentially let somebody that says, hey, I have a ton of the technology experience you're looking for, but without that formal degree you're looking for. And as a point there, the best analyst I know actually has a French major. So.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I would just echo, I'm Jennifer Nienaber from Procter & Gamble, and the thing that we always struggle with is, and I'm actually interested for help in the room, is this whole idea of these innovative methods or approaches that people are using to get at these hybrid or the soft plus tech plus digital. I mean, we're still in the same world of, I'm a case graduate as well. I'm a chemical engineer. So this whole idea of we're looking for chemies and then assuming that they're going to have some of these other, hybrid skills or these, digital plus tech skills. I'm just curious, because we have not cracked the nut either, in terms of, do you flip that, kind of look at it in a 180? You don't look at a degree, you look at some other skill set like a hackathon or something like this. I'm just actually very curious to see how anybody else has cracked this nut.
Well, my name is John Reed with John Deere, and I don't know that we've solved the problem either, but I think there's a common thing that, sometimes you need to add to the skill sets of your existing people, material scientists, and they can use AI and digital methods, and I think that's one aspect of you're adding tools to the toolkit of individuals in the company. The other one is I'm trying to get my arms around and understand a more strategic view. As people go through the digital transformation, they need people that have been in the product world, the physical world, to have understanding of the product side, but to be digital natives for that technology. And I find that companies have went to a lot of work to hire people, usually based on behavioral competencies, and you're a good fit based on targeted selection or other types of approaches that companies use. And I'm hearing you describe displaced individuals or people that want to get new jobs and sort of not knowing where they are. But do you see any situations where companies are saying, hey, we've got all of these really good people, we just need less of this type of individual, and we need to get them to be retrained because they're close enough to these other areas that it's worth investing in those employees versus hiring the new people. They don't exist and they don't have the familiarity with the company. So I don't know if you address any of those, but to me that's the, companies are not going to be able to just acquire talent, at least very easily, to fill the voids and have a company's core values, in my opinion.
I think that's such an important point. And if you look nationally, so I was actually the chief economist of the Commerce Department a few years ago for the U.S. and we saw these people complaining about skill shortage, and these kind of two narratives. One that we're going to have all these jobs and over our lifetime, and to me that suggests a need for real foundational skills. That that French major learned a whole lot about learning something that was totally foreign, probably learned about a different context, a different historical period, how to compare and contrast, and about reading French literature. That gives them skills that are going to be useful in future things. Is they're really going to be able to leap at the kind of and really take advantage of the kind of training that John Deere is offering, the kind of training that Jean talked about. And instead we actually don't see that. We see employers spending less on training, like a third less than they did even 10, 15 years ago. So I think this is a real problem. Obviously, I think, and so this is a case where I think, actually data can help. That to some extent all we see when companies are really cost conscious, they see the cost of training people. The data can now help you see, at least potentially, what's the benefit. We trained this person who had an adjacent skill, and now we have a whole new product line that we wouldn't have had otherwise. Or our ramp up was so much faster because we had somebody who knew about the product side. And then I also think, on the government side, I guess I have 2 points. And so one is just public services are useful. And you ask, why are there not updated job classifications? One is because the Bureau of Labor Statistics budget nationally has been frozen or shrinking for years. And so this, this is a case where we're penny wise and pound foolish, seeking tax breaks, and then this, we actually are stymied in our ability to find the right people. And then the second thing is a suggestion, or maybe you're doing this already. Some other states, when they run these focus groups for the sector strategies, they're not just kind of listening to the employers about what do you want, but there's a kind of nudging, or sort of better. If you think about the state actually has a preference, I think, or at least I do as a taxpayer. I would rather see higher skill, higher wage jobs, and people using the automation in a complementary way, to the extent that the state can kind of suggest, hey, you can do this, or hey, have you considered looking for these hybrid employees, or here are some questions you might ask in case the job seeker isn't as entrepreneurial as the one you're suggesting. That it seems like there's things actually that Jobs Ohio can do to kind of nudge this process along.
I think some of the things we're seeing, employers do is really, so for example, we have an employer who had COBOL as a system, and now it's gone. But they're taking those employees now, and it's taken them a long time to transition off that system. But now they've worked with an education institution to assess those employees and determine, but through assessments that are tailored to their culture, to the capability for people to learn. So they're not just assessing their technical skill, they're assessing what could you learn, how fast can you learn, how often can you learn, and then what is your culture fit, and then here are the types of roles we have with the types of outcomes they need to have, and then creating those assessments to help guide, okay, what kind of role could they be in, and then what education and training program can actually tailor that a little bit more for us so that we can get these people retooled. So we do see businesses doing that with individuals that they have to keep shifting because of changes in the industry itself. But then we also see employers who are challenging the paradigm of job classifications and saying, why do we have to hire that way? Why can't we just create skills hiring. So they are throwing out the job. I have one employer in Ohio who is in a financial institution who has piloted with managers he felt could handle it, hiring people without bachelor's degrees in finance. But it's new, and it's taken time to prove it that these people can be on the job and actually come in and learn and take some accelerated training while they're there and be just as great employees. Right. The West Coast gets this. They're hiring people right off college campuses. But we are still kind of stuck in that Midwest strategy, and we do have to kind of get a little more innovative about how we look at skills versus jobs.
So I guess I want to jump in because I worry about that, actually. I mean, partly, I guess, my own job security, but I mean, I think it's like it can be a short-term thing, and I imagine the metric, but, what does that person look like in 10 years? They haven't had the kind of foundation. I mean, maybe you have an apprenticeship model where they're doing their college on the side or something. But I worry about give them the skills that they need today. Well, then tomorrow there's going to be, we don't need that anymore. Throw you out, and then you lose all that product knowledge and firm specific knowledge goes away. So I worry that if you're going to do that, there's a bunch of complementary practices that you need. You may need to invest more in not just skills training. I guess I also worry about citizenship and people not understanding civics and that kind of stuff. So anyway, I have a number of concerns about that strategy, but I'll let Gene jump in.
Well, I mean, you raise a couple of interesting points. We've had employers come into our boot camps. We do at the end of every cycle we do a demo day, and it's kind of like the demonstration of it. It's the capstone programs all in one room. And in one very recent one of these demo days, we had a manager speaking directly to the students and understanding that she could fill this role on her team, and this person was one of our non-traditional students, did not have a 4-year degree. Coincidentally, her colleague was in the room, an HR person, and so we convened a meeting right there where this manager got to address this with her HR colleague. I don't know if that person was placed, but I do know that those kinds of conversations are going on, and the need for that is accelerating. It's accelerating. We talk to line managers. We understand their needs in trying to fill these roles, and they run up against within their own organization this reticence to bring in skilled people, but they're traditionally they don't qualify, but they could walk into the job tomorrow and do that data analytics and do that coding and get that stuff done.
So actually, maybe want to bring in a little. We had actually, I guess, really one question, and maybe we can collect a few questions and get that. But really great. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up question, Bob Graff from Lubrizol, really on the boot camp concept, and what can an employer expect, whether we have an individual who may be over here in one domain and we want them to get an analytics domain, we want to get them coding domain, you name the domain, but in a 24-week part-time, if the employee is motivated, and we would then put the employee in a different role, what can we expect out of the boot camp? I mean, what level are you going to get out of that 24-week boot camp with just a general background going in?
Right.
Talented individual.
With the general background in coding, as an example, they are prepared to do an entry-level coding job. Somebody without any skill, coming in without any IT skill, they can go in and they can do an entry-level job. Somebody with some skill, with some IT, she or he is going to be way more productive and way more engaged and way more capable. That's the experience. That's the experience.
And that would be true of other areas as well, such as analytics.
Data analytics,
you're
cybersecurity.
Essentially hiring a bachelor or master's in statistics.
And they
coming
already,
out of the boot camp.
They have the culture. They already have the advantage of the corporate culture, and so they're way more productive. They're way more productive.
Young Jin, do you want?
So I guess it's a part comments, question, and perhaps suggestion to those who are in the room. So one of my colleagues at Carnegie Mellon just got an NSF grant where her goal was to introduce AI and data analytics tools to farmers. And then eventually transition them to be data scientists themselves by building context-specific AI, easy-to-use AI tools to the degree where these people can figure out what kind of model I need. And so they know the data, they know the context, so they can sustain their own AI operation. So essentially, like as I said in their, during their talk, it is becoming like a really easy to use tool. So there are people who are building Excel spreadsheet. There are people who are building, plugins for Excel, and there are people who are very competent in using Excel spreadsheet. So I think we need to think in that way, as we think about it. And so part of my sort of like suggestion is that, so I started having conversation with some of our undergrad students, and then I use that as an example. One of the undergrad students, she single-handedly negotiated with Google to bring Google developer program on campus to build tools for non-for-profit organizations here in Cleveland. So I said, like non-for-profits are problematic, but also we have a lot of legacy manufacturing companies. And, we're not talking about big corporations. We're talking about like a very small companies who really can benefit from this type of things. Can we, create a program where, we can instrument some of these old tools. These guys are pushing their, TPU down the pipe, and they're trying to promote their development tools. Like, can we help build our students build these tools and programming tools, and then work with it? So, and then I'm wondering, what would it take for local business communities and universities like us to formulate, and then programs like Jobs Ohio, government, together to think about, rather more systemic, approach, thinking about, they're looking at different sectors. And if we think manufacturing is important, we got to do something, like farming. I think if they can do with farmers, don't you think we can actually do something with our factory workers, And then I will just conclude with a story. I was talking to Chief HR Officer of Lincoln Electric, and she asked me out of blue, she said, can you train, factory workers on the line, And I said, why do you want them to be trained for data analytics and, for their work? And she said, well, number one, we have very hard time recruiting people. So if we offer that as a benefit, we may be able to fill the position better. But number two, who knows what they will be able to do with the tool in making our plants safer and better. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity untapped. It's just that we need to, it's very hard for one person to do, like job classification is all wrong at the moment, right? So people just cannot make the connection. So I think if a forum like this can bring key stakeholders together, and university used to be the one who provided general education, for citizens, but maybe there is a different kind of role that university plays and larger corporations play. So maybe there is a gen ed civic life, may take place in the job place, and then the university is doing something somewhat different. Maybe there's a more research-oriented skill, kind of things that these companies cannot pick it up. So maybe some opportunities for us to think about.
So I think one thing is that certainly our businesses aren't abandoning the degrees in that scenario. What they want is talent faster, and then they're letting them come through their organizations, take tuition reimbursement programs, and get their degrees. I work with a boot camp called Tech Elevator here in Cleveland, and Anthony, their CEO, will tell you we're getting some really great jobs for people who have an intuitive nature in programming, but they still have to get their bachelor's degree at some point. If they're going to progress and they're going to be able to work for all types of organizations, they eventually have to get credentialing that helps those businesses sell their services, particularly if they're in the consulting space, right, and taking over IT platforms. But if you think about what you just talked about, I would say one thing is after 30 years in this space, what I would say is one of our biggest downfalls is trying to come up with a state strategy. I think developing talent pools is a regional play. because each region has different businesses who have different product lines and services and skill needs. Each region has different resources. There isn't a case everywhere in Ohio. So there are different playing grounds from which each is starting, and I think that having a regional strategy makes much more sense than us trying to come from a statewide top down. I think there are things then that we can learn from the regional strategies that inform policy, inform funding, inform even frameworks that we could then support in each region that might generate from a state type level. Now, Jobs Ohio is a private nonprofit, but we do try to work with a lot of the state agencies and partners in trying to bring people to the table to say, here's a problem. How could we take everyone's resources and accelerate? I just went to a thing that Purdue did around strategic doing, which was a whole different framework. We typically bring employers in a room and say, let's categorize all the challenges, and now let's figure out a solution. What strategic doing does is say, let's talk about the ideal state, and then figure out what resources in the room will get us there. And if it only gets us to a portion of it, then we've got to step further. And I sometimes think maybe that's a good framework to change our dialogue, to quit thinking about all the challenges, because there's a lot of them. But how could we put people in a room that have resources and determine, could we get 2 steps towards the ideal state in this region with this group of people?
Yeah, and
I want to get some more questions, but
Okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
quick. Go.
Well, I would just also challenge everybody in the room to think of the issues, think of the challenges, think of where you want, where you can identify a need, and connect with an organization like this. Just make a contact within case. Call us up, and actually, in fact, that's an extraordinary idea that people are reticent to do. It's find the person. You actually, anybody could call me and as a conduit into lots of resources. Identify a need. There's places within places like this that you can get stuff done really fast. You'd be very surprised. Go ahead.
Actually, I'd say one thing. I mean, I think this process of how tasks get assigned to occupations is really not understood, and I think there's a real chance to make a difference here. And what I see often, on shop floors is that if there's something new, the tendency is put it on an engineer, and so you end up with much more of the responsibility being in the engineer head and less on the shop floor, so you're losing your context knowledge. And I think the vision that Youngjin has suggests a different thing. And if together this group, we could figure out how to make some of these context-specific tools or incentivize people to provide them, that could be really cool, because I think it is hard even for the large companies to do this by themselves. So
back to the point of
is there a mic?
Hello. Back to the point of the finance example without a degree, I think the one thing that I would then add to the soft skills, digital skills, and technology is embracing continuous learning. Because in the example of your data analytics boot camp, let's say you're just focused on SAS or R or Python, how do you teach them to apply that process to the next generation of technologies and analytical skills?
And truly, we are very, very focused on the idea. Again, I repeat, the 4-year degree is one thing, but the 40-year relationship with the university, the ongoing, it's truly continuous learning. We are in a continuous learning economy. If that's news to anybody here, I'd be very surprised. It's a continuous learning economy. The structures, the processes, the systems that exist right now are not going to exist when my daughter graduates from university in 5 years. It's not going to be the same.
Actually, other comments or that people. Yeah.
Well, and to another point in that too is not only if you're driving innovation, but also trying to set up like a center of excellence for innovation, where people that have embraced that continuous learning and thinking outside of the box can all sit together.
Great. I think hand the mic.
I'm Mark Matlock from ADM. I was just going to relate. I have led a R&D department at ADM for a number of years, and quite some time back we started our own little IT department within that. And my focus at the time, because a lot of our experiments, you set something up, you run it for 6 months, and then you're done, and you're designing another one. So you need a little bit different type of mentality. And so I hired people who maybe didn't have the education, but they were very passionate about electronics, computing as a hobby. And so I kept bringing in these types of people. And they also didn't fall into silos. So in our corporate IT, there's the networking people, the security people, the database people, the programmers, the systems people, and so forth. And these guys worked across all those things in R&D. So a couple interesting things happened. A few years ago, they learned how to program GPUs. And then about 3 or 4 years after that, the head of the group came in and he says, I can't afford to keep working here anymore. My hobby, I make 5 times at home what I make here, and I love it here, but I can't afford to spend the time here. And then he also took one of his colleagues, and so now they're all doing very well as entrepreneurs. The other side of it, corporate IT did learn a little bit about these guys, and every time we do a major acquisition, when it comes to integrating the networks, they'll ask these guys to get involved. And so 2 years ago, they did one for everything in China, and all the issues that you would have. But in a 48-hour period, they did that integration. And it was because they crossed silos in the corporate IT group. The problems always occur at the interfaces. And so if you weren't intimately familiar with both sides of the interface, to the point you were making, it can be really challenging to get to the root cause issues.
Great. Actually, in blue shirt.
Yeah, Robert Osborne. I'm with Novozymes, also in R&D. And we typically hire bachelor's, master's, PhD level scientists. And what we found that we really want, and we've seen this a couple of times, is this merging of skills where you have someone that has the laboratory benchtop skills, but also has the data science skills. So the question I have is, are we seeing a formal merging of those disciplines in the academic level? So the people are coming out. I know we can develop the skills with the boot camps and whatnot, but if you are going to hire the degree level, it would be great if we could find people that already have a combination of understanding the bench science and the data science. Because right now, we have people that generate a ton of data at a scale that they don't really know what to do with it. And so that's what we really need, is that merging of skills.
Actually, we have, what I'm thinking is there's a few questions. I think why don't we take 2 or 3 more, and then we'll have a round of answers. I think yeah.
Yeah, I totally want to second that, because I think that's what we're seeing too, that the traditional science and engineering students that we're pulling out of campuses just like Case look very different than they would have 10, 15, 20 years. So I think there is that merging to a certain extent, but I would be very interested in that answer. The other question I have too is, and it's more maybe a tension to bring up, is this whole idea, if you think about this 40-year relationship that you were speaking about, which is wonderful, I think the question I have is, how does that blend with that kind of triad? The university who's teaching, or who's providing that learning. There's the employee or the person who's looking for that, upskilling, which I know is a word you weren't totally fond of, that lifelong learning, and then also the employer who is potentially supporting that. Because sometimes what we see, especially in P&G and other firms, is unless there's some business value that's immediately recognizable, it's really hard to support that at a 24-week level. So I think I'm curious how, if Case or your program has solved that to a certain extent, of how do you get that triad to kind of all be rowing in the same direction?
A couple more questions? Last chance? All right.
Okay. So one thing that's really exciting on the Case campus right now is you heard from Ben Vinson, the provost, this morning. He's been very much engaged in a strategic planning process, and the point being that there's a big interdisciplinary line through what his vision is for the next number of years, and at Siegel, through Siegel, and with relationships with the engineering school and the medical school, we're looking at a program. Essentially, it's Data X. It's pushing data across disciplines, so that we have data scientists, but we we have people who are very, very skilled in an engineering discipline or in medical science or other. So we're creating master's degrees that essentially have that line through them, and they're very interdisciplinary. It's a data underpinning with all of the specialties and the expertise that you would expect in the specific disciplines.
That's really interesting. Do you want to say and have something you want to just kind of the last word? I guess we have, yeah.
So we are seeing how employers are handling that is because education isn't funded in a way that they can customize for every employer. It just isn't possible. So the way we've seen two industries, which was insurance in Ohio and manufacturing under the Ohio Manufacturers Association, what they did was bring businesses together. So insurance, they brought 30 CEOs together. They met with education and said, here's what we think we need. What do you think you can do, and where's our gap? And is our gap something we can actually together make happen, or what other partners do we have to bring in to change curriculum, change even maybe admittance standards, or change the funding and structure of how the degree is delivered so that it can be acceptable and articulated elsewhere. So that's where we've seen the most success, because employers, you can put aside competitive issues and realize if we don't have a talent pool to fight over, that's our biggest problem. So we will figure out where the people go, where they really want to work and the work content they want, and we'll fight over them like we always do, but we've got to join together in how we work with education to help create different types of education and curriculum delivery scenarios. And that's where we're really seeing the biggest movement forward, is when multiple employers do that with education.
Yeah, maybe just to wrap up, I think it's a really exciting potential here in this room that I guess first, I think, on the point about justifying the cost of training from an employer point of view, I think the big data can actually help in the sense of you can actually see maybe, and you need to take a long-term perspective, but looking over a long period, maybe it was the person with the weird background and that came in some weird way, but look at the profiles of people who've become leaders. And it may be that actually I have a study looking at apprenticeship. It's a little bit different issue, but we found that in fact it really took big data and overcoming the silos to help people see that this upfront investment. So in the case of Siemens, they invest $200,000 in their apprentices, but it gets paid back within the first year of their employment because they're flexible and they can be assigned anywhere. And so thinking about that kind of thing can help you. And then I think also this idea of partnership, that some of the costs can fall. And also, if you're doing general training that's not just focused on your firm, then it's reasonable to expect taxpayers to come in and help with that. I guess I want to echo both Youngjin and Jean from the Case Western point of view. I think we'd love to be a part of this in any way, as a convener, as a supplier, as a helper, or place to talk through problems in a non-competitive setting. Thanks very much for coming, and look forward to continuing the dialogue.